I have this fundamental belief that, a cow's not more important than a caterpillar, and we need to value all animals the same way. And a single shot of Roundup can kill hundreds of millions of animals in a 100-acre plot. And so when we look at this, not as a sustainable farming operation, but really as a regenerative farming operation where you have super diverse hundreds of species of bugs and worms and critters and grasses and flowers and weeds, that's a real ecosystem. And that's actually doing the least amount of harm. And even better than that, it's doing the most amount of good for our land and our soil.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hoda Labrador. This is episode 127, and my guest is farmer Paul Grieve of Primal Pastures. Paul calls himself an accidental farmer. His brother-in-law kind of hoodwinked him into the business. He'll explain all that in just a moment. And today he tells us how his farm operation grew from that surprising beginning to where it is today, and all that he's learned along the way. How critical it is, for example, to know where your food comes from, what its quality of life has been like, what it's been fed or injected with. He goes into how labels on our food don't tell us the whole story, and why organic food can be more expensive. In the end, you'll catch his vision of the power of regenerative agriculture to produce food that is good for us, our children, and future generations. I hope to visit Paul and his farm this summer when I go out to California in July. I really want to see this place with my own eyes because it certainly sounded like a lot was going on as we were recording this the other day. Before we get into it, we want to pause and recognize our sponsors. The Wise Traditions podcast is supported in part by Krautpounder. Do you make your own ferments? You're going to want this beautiful tool made by Krautpounder. It does just what its name suggests. It is a handmade piece of maple that is unique and perfectly crafted for preparing your ferments. Get yourself a Krautpounder from Krautpounder.com. And listeners like you, your donations and membership contributions help support projects like this podcast. Go to westonaprice.org to give a contribution today, and thank you. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, I understand you had no farming background. You were just a city kid in Seattle. How did you get drawn into this whole field?
Yeah, we're the most non-traditional and accidental farmers you'll probably meet today, at least. So back in 2012, we were struggling with health problems as a family. So arthritis was pretty bad, ankles, knees, back, and couldn't breathe through my nose. And all these weird problems for a 23, 24-year-old kid. And we started learning about Weston A. Price and all these cool things and started eating that way. And we felt so much better. We were shocked that the food that you put in your body can have that big of an impact on how you feel and perform. And so we started going down a rabbit hole of trying to buy healthier foods. And from that, we started buying all the grass-fed, free-range, organic, like all these fancy meats and spending a lot of extra money. And the farther we dove into it, we started to learn that those labels mean next to nothing these days. And that was really frustrating for us.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around, Paul, the idea that here you are, 23 years old, you should be hale and hearty, and you're experiencing joint pain. And then you keep saying, was it not just you? Was it your family as well?
Yeah, it was really my whole family. So for me, I was an officer in the Marine Corps, and we spent a lot of time outside and hiking heavy packs and doing a lot of these things. And I was a healthy, young, all-American athlete in college, and I ate the standard American diet, which now we know stands for it's the SAD diet, but for all intents and purposes, I should have been a healthy kid without these problems. And that's really what was throwing me off.
Yeah, totally. So how many siblings do you have?
Well, it's me and my brother. And then down here, my wife has 5 brothers and sisters. So that's who I really went through this health journey with, was my wife's family.
Now, were they already into all this whole real food stuff?
Not at all. No. So we had really just all kind of came to it together at the same time. My father-in-law lost like 100 pounds. My 2 brothers-in-law, who were all-American college basketball players, they lost a bunch of weight, and that post-college weight kind of came off, and we all just started feeling so much better. And as you know, it sort of changes your mindset when you start to learn that food can really have such a big impact on the way that you feel. And we just went down the rabbit hole.
In a good way, right?
Well, yeah, in a way that was unconventional. So we were sitting around in April of 2012 joking about getting some chickens. Like, wouldn't it be so funny if we bought chicks and raised them in the backyard, and we're so tired of all these dumb labels, and like wouldn't that be funny? So my brother-in-law, Rob, is in the conversation. He steps away for a minute. I figured he was going to the bathroom, but he comes back about 10 minutes later and he goes, "Oh, hey, by the way, I just ordered 50 chicks and they're going to be here in 2 weeks." And we're like, "You what?" "What are you talking about? We've never raised a dog, man. We can't do this. We don't know what to do." But that was a pretty crazy time.
Yeah, tell me more. So the chicks arrive. I'm trying to picture, what did you guys do? Did you have regular jobs at that time? How did you handle it?
Everybody had full-time jobs. I was an accountant after finishing the Marine Corps. My brother-in-law, who's a high school teacher, the other brother-in-law was getting ready to become a medical student. And then the father-in-law, Tom, was a contractor. So we all had our full-time things. Luckily, Tom had always been a fan of a guy named Joel Salatin, and he's always just sort of followed this, and he'd enjoyed the guy's talks and some of his books. And so he said, well, there's a way that we can raise these birds outside on pasture without using any kind of drugs or antibiotics or hormones or any of the weird stuff. And that was intriguing to us from the start.
So you got started on the right foot. Joel Salatin is our hero.
He's our hero too.
And so you were trying to kind of just imitate his model of raising the chickens and the real great outdoors, right? And what he does is he tries to mimic nature in the way he raises his livestock, correct?
All of Joel's sort of fundamental values became instantly our fundamental values. I got the farming bug when I started listening to him and listened to his YouTube talks, and he just inspired me so deeply in a way that was like, wow, we can produce good food that's nutrient dense and good for people, but it's also good for the land and it heals the soil. And the triple bottom line is it's a high animal welfare system that's good for the bird itself too while it's alive. And to me, it was like, okay, this is something that I could actually see myself committing my life's work to at some point. And so we're just super inspired by Joel and still are.
So I'm hearing a little music in the background.
No, I queued up the background music for when I started talking about Joel Salatin.
Oh my God. That is so funny.
So I'm close to a coffee shop and I'm trying to see if I could step a little bit farther away. Here, let me see if it gets better if I go out here.
So you're right. It's healthy for the animals. It's healthy for people. It's good for the earth. It's got everything going for it, this style. And yet, so many of us are still so disconnected from the land and from this understanding of how we relate to animals in the land. Talk to us a little bit about the food crisis of today.
Yeah, I think it's just a major byproduct of the industrialization of food. We like to say the 1950s were amazing for planes and trains and automobiles, and things got bigger and faster and cheaper and better for a lot of industries, but they were sort of a flop for food. And by sort of, I mean, they were a complete flop for food. I mean, it was horrific, the kind of way that we started viewing animals as widgets in a manufacturing system, and bigger and better are better and faster and cheaper, and all these things that really shouldn't be applied to our food system were. And as people demanded more and more cheap food, companies responded to that and they were able to produce it. And now we're so disconnected from what's actually happening on these, you can call them farms, I call them manufacturing facilities. That's really caused a huge problem with our food crisis.
And the pain point is really our health, isn't it? When people realize that their health is compromised, suddenly they're getting this wake-up call.
I think that's how a lot of people come into it. We also have a lot of customers that approach it from a lover of land and ecology and wildlife. And that's been a huge pain point for the planet, the climate, and everything else that's going on with industrial agriculture. And then animal welfare, too. It's a huge way that we find ourselves getting customers that say, I'm just tired of watching chickens walk around in these miserable factory farms and having a horrible life and being debeaked and detalonized and pumped full of antibiotics and drugs and vaccines. And I just don't want to support that anymore.
What you offer is an alternative to those who think they want to eschew meat altogether, that they want to stay away from meat because they're so concerned about animal welfare.
Yes, and there's a lot packed into that question. So we do get a lot of customers that are either former vegan, vegetarian, or considering going vegan, vegetarian. But the other important thing is just because you opt out of meat doesn't mean that you're opting out of industrial agriculture, which affects much more than just the animal that's slaughtered, So we go into it a lot with folks that think, well, just by backing out of the meat supply chain, that you have no impact on environment or climate or animal health or nutrient density. I mean, it's far from true. There's animals affected on corn fields and soy fields and everything else.
Can you go into that a little bit with us too, Paul? What do you mean?
I have this fundamental belief that, a cow's not more important than a caterpillar, and we need to value all animals the same way. And a single shot of Roundup can kill hundreds of millions of animals in a 100-acre plot. And so when we look at this, not as a sustainable farming operation, but really as a regenerative farming operation where you have super diverse hundreds of species of bugs and worms and critters and grasses and flowers and weeds, that's a real ecosystem. And that's actually doing the least amount of harm. And even better than that, it's doing the most amount of good for our land and our soil.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Not only just doing the least amount of harm, but doing the most amount of good.
And that's what it comes back to. And that's what gets me excited about agriculture is that we can actually do amazing things for the soil and the air quality and the groundwater and for organic matter and feed growth and wildlife. I mean, there's so much good that can come from properly managed animal agriculture.
And so that's part of the solution, isn't it?
It is. And the cool thing is that that solution also provides super nutrient dense food for people, because in the same way we want to be regenerating soil, we also, as a human race, we want to be regenerating our bodies all the time. And it's not just about finding the foods that are going to have the least amount of impact on our body. It's about finding foods that are healing and they're positive for our bodies.
Yeah, so talk to us as consumers. I don't have a farm. I live in the city. What can we do to kind of turn things around? I'm not regenerating soil in my backyard, unfortunately. It's really full of lead and other problems. So talk to me.
You can do more than you realize for supporting operations that do. And the only reason people like me exist and farms like me exist are because we have thousands of customers that come and say, yes, we demand this kind of food. We want this kind of food. We're willing to pay a premium of not only dollars, but also a little bit of a lack of convenience for this food. And I'm willing to order it online or go pick it up from the farmer's market or all these sort of unique ways that you have to get this type of food these days. And really, it's about stepping out of the modern day system of like, what does it say on the package, to let's go back to like having a relationship with the farm and the farmer and knowing where that food actually came from.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I see pictures online where people are like, is this meat okay? And it'll have all this information about how they're pasture-raised, but grass-finished. And people are scratching their heads trying to figure out what it means. Maybe the best step is to step away from all those labels, right?
I play a game, and I've developed this over 6 years of researching, and it's called You Name the Label and I'll Name the Loophole. And literally, I could go through every single label. You know, you name grass-fed, grass-finished, free-range, pasture-raised, antibiotic-free. Like, you name it, I'll show you 5 to 10 farms that are using those labels and they're not doing what you think that they're doing. I mean, antibiotic-free is like a great example of this. So all chicken in the U.S. is antibiotic-free, but all chicken can also get antibiotics from the day that it's hatched until the day that it's slaughtered. How can that possibly be? And the average consumer doesn't realize that. If you see antibiotic-free, you think that that animal probably didn't get antibiotics for its whole life, right?
Right.
The way that it works is the antibiotic residue needs to be tested under a certain parts per billion that's set by the FDA. And as long as the meat itself is under that threshold, that's antibiotic-free chicken. And people don't realize that. It doesn't mean that the animal didn't get antibiotics. It could have gotten antibiotics every single day. But as long as the meat tested below that parts per billion with antibiotic residue, then that's antibiotic-free.
I'm shaking my head right now. This has made a light bulb go off for me, because I was talking to someone the other day about antibiotic-free chicken, exactly that. And they were like, oh yeah, Tyson started that. And I was thinking, how did Tyson start that? Like, I just didn't get what they were talking about. But maybe what they were trying to say is, this is the label that these companies wear proudly, but it may not be as accurate as we think at all, right?
It's just not what you or I would think. And in the same way, you can take free-range chicken. The image that conjures up in the average American's head is an animal that's outside on pasture, frolicking, eating grass and bugs and seeds and worms and all that good stuff. When in reality, all that it means, so you take a normal chicken grow house, which is 600 foot long, 40 foot wide, and about 30,000 chickens inside of there. If you cut doors at the end of that grow house, and the birds technically have access to the outdoors, whether they ever go outside or not. I mean, it can be 110 degrees outside with no food, water, or shade. But technically they had access to the outdoors. That is all of a sudden a free-range chicken. And that's not at all what people are thinking that they're getting when they pay for that free-range, antibiotic-free organic chicken in the store.
Wow. Well, I wish we could play that game. We'll have to do it on another podcast, because I just think it's fascinating. We want to really bust through the myths of the labels. And that's probably one of the issues that we have with the food today, right? We think if it has the right label, it's okay for us.
I think that that's what we've gotten to. And the reason that we've gotten to that is because with the large scale industrial farming, you're not going to go and pick up, your food from a farm anymore. So we've really lost this connection. And you walk through the supermarket, you have all these beautiful cellophane wrapped meats that say all the right things. And we think that we know what we're getting, and ultimately we don't. And I think that we need to get back to that in some way, shape, or form.
Coming up, Paul explains how he is holding on to his values for sustainable, regenerative, humane practices on his farm as his farm and business expands. We want to pause now and recognize our sponsors. Krautpounder. Have you tried making your own ferments? You must get yourself a Krautpounder. Krautpounder makes beautiful pieces for the process. Each Krautpounder is turned from a solid piece of maple natural hardwood. They each have their own unique markings and are finished with natural walnut oil. The design for the pounder was actually originally inspired by a Krautpounder that belonged to a grandmother of a member in the Eugene, Oregon Weston A. Price chapter. So get yourself one today by going to krautpounder.com and get fermenting. And listeners like you. Sarah Dahl, 435, had this to say on Apple Podcasts. I look forward to each new episode. I also appreciate that the Wise Traditions podcasts are not fad diet based, but traditional wisdom based. Sarah, I feel the same way. And thank you so much for your review. It means a lot to us because we're putting so much into these shows. We like to know that they're resonating. So please do us a favor, everyone, and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts as Sarah did. It helps get the word out, and it is very encouraging to us. Well, so Paul, I want to challenge you a little bit here because I follow you guys on Instagram. And so I feel like you have, in some ways, a large-scale operation there. Now, I like that you're growing things responsibly and sustainably, and yet is it going to get so big that you're going to have to compromise your values?
That's a great question, something we talk about all the time. So right now, Primal Pastures is the largest daily move pasture poultry operator in the United States, maybe the world. We don't really know. And right now we're doing about 3,000 birds every single week, that we're harvesting, which sounds like so many birds. Sounds like I would have never imagined in a million years that we would have grown to that kind of a size when we put those first 50 birds in the backyard.
Exactly.
However, contrast that to the small scale operation, free range, organic chicken that is Mary's. I don't usually talk about other brands, but take somebody like that that's considered a small farm here in California, and a farm like that's going to be doing about 1 million birds a week. So we have a very, very, very long ways to go before we ever touch that industrial level. Mm-hmm. And the other point to that is, I think it's actually very important right now that farmers like me across the country figure out ways to scale their businesses and grow their businesses so that we can start to bring costs down a little bit. Because the one thing that's really holding back this movement is education. But second to that, I think, is cost. And the reality is it's just not plausible for some people to afford food that's produced this way. And it's definitely my goal and my dream to make it more affordable for people. And to do that, it really requires some volume that's done responsibly.
Let's talk about the cost on your end, because I'm thinking, why is it more expensive to buy food that's raised more naturally with maybe less pesticides and less antibiotics?
You'd think it's less input, so it should cost less, right? But unfortunately, that's not the way it works in this world. So much of agriculture is based on scale and volume and pricing. And when we're talking about buying a few buckets worth of feed, essentially a few pallets worth of feed at a time, and the big guys are talking about filling up train car loads of feed at a time, it's just a very, very different price right off the bat just because of volume. But then you go into the quality of the feeds too. The reality is that with Primal Pastures, we're using a certified organic, soy-free, GMO-free feed that's coming locally from here in California. And a feed like that just can't compete on price. It's probably 5 times as expensive as what the big operators are paying for their feed. They're much lower quality, but they're paying a lot less for it. And then also just the labor required and being outside with the birds, raising them this way where they're getting fresh pasture every single day on a small scale. It's a totally different requirement. And then the final point that I would say too is I have to make a little bit more per chicken. If you think about it, I need to make more per chicken doing 3,000 birds a week than somebody does that's doing 1 million birds a week, just so that I can stay in business and have employees that have a living wage and stuff like that too.
Yeah, and it makes sense when I stop and think about it on a personal level. For example, if my child, if I want to prevent them from being sick, it's going to take an investment of time. Like I make sure they get outside, and money when I buy this good food. I'm really shoring up their health, but I'm putting all this into it. Whereas it's cheaper for me to buy the Tylenol when they have a fever.
Right.
but it's better if I'm doing the other, right? So it is going to take an investment, I guess, from your point of view and from the consumer at this juncture.
And it's also gotten back to, we're trying to go back to a natural rate of growth for these animals. I mean, for the last 50 years, industry has sort of pushed animal agriculture production to just go as fast as humanly possible. And I don't think that that's good. So we believe in sort of this natural rate of growth, and we take more than twice as long to grow a bird that's the same size as something coming out of one of these free-range organic farms. And to us, that's totally okay. That doesn't bother me. I'd rather have it grow more naturally. And you look at our birds and they're just robust and healthy and active at the end of their life. And that's in total contrast to folks that are just trying to grow them as big and fat as they can as fast as possible.
And the way they do that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's by injecting them with hormones or antibiotics because they know that they are going to pump up faster.
They outlawed the use of hormones in poultry in the 1980s, but don't let industry say that and leave it there, because there's a lot of other things that are used. Antibiotic growth promoters are used almost across the board. They figured out that just prophylactically injecting antibiotics into the feed and water supply will increase the rate of growth pretty significantly. There's also been a lot done in breeding. In the breeding space, chicken on the same exact feed grown today as opposed to back in 1945 is almost twice as big in the same amount of time.
So the objective of the folks who are raising these animals on this huge, massive kind of industrial level is to get these animals to market as quickly as possible. And the way to do that is to promote that growth, that kind of unnatural growth. And you're saying that the way you all do it is more natural, but it slows it down. So you're not going to make the money as quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, too, that these big industrial farmers, they're easily vilified and they've gotten a really bad rap. And ultimately, they're just trying to respond to the consumer demand. And this consumer asked for cheap food, and they're providing cheap food. It's a little bit too easy for us to go and say, oh, yeah, these bad guys, these farmers that are growing birds in this horrible environment, doing all this stuff. Well, ultimately, it's the consumer that asked for it, and they're just responding to that. And what I like to say to my friends in conventional ag is, look, I'm just responding to a different consumer that's asking for something that's not what you're doing. And that's okay. We can both exist. I can even be friends with these guys, but it's important to note that there is a huge tidal wave of demand that's coming from people that want food a different way.
And we want to be voting with our fork or something like that. Doesn't Joel Salatin say something like that? Every bite you take is a vote for the kind of food that you want.
And that's really the only way to change the system is if you want to see something different, then start paying attention to how you're spending your money and who you're supporting. And that's ultimately how we change the industry.
So talk to us about how we can make that happen if we truly do want to see food grown responsibly and sustainably and according to nature's design. How can we make that happen?
I'm a big fan of just know your farmer. It sounds really simple, and it really is. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. In 2018 now, it's easier than ever before to get to know your farmer, either in person or online. Every good farm has a website, and they've got stuff going on social media, and they're going to have some kind of a farmer's market booth or some way to distribute product where you can go and actually figure out who that farmer is and meet that farmer and talk to them and shake their hand and ask them some questions about their ranch. And one of my biggest hacks that I think has been really effective for people over the years that I've explained this to them is ask them if you can take a farm tour. Mm-hmm. You know, when you're at the farmer's market booth, say, hey, could I come out to a farm tour and check out your farm? And the reality is you don't actually have to go. It's just gauging the way that they respond to a question like that you can really learn a lot about the farmer. If they start saying, oh, well, you know, it can't really bring people on the farm, it's biosecurity, and we've got all these hazards, and, you know, they've got no pictures of the animals, they've got nothing going on, very bad sign. I mean, it's a big red flag. But if you've got somebody who says, oh my gosh, I'd love to have you out, we have this tour program, you know, scroll through my phone, look at all these pictures of my animals outside and all this stuff, that's a very good sign. So I think that's a really easy way, is just get to know your farmer.
That's a great word. I like that. Joel Salatin's farm, also Polyface here in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, is just like an open house every day. He's like, I got nothing to hide.
Yep.
Come on, bring your people. And that's a beautiful philosophy. Well, when you were talking, Paul, I have a question now about like kind of the behind the scenes. You were talking about how most farms nowadays have their website and they have their social media. How do you manage it all? Your business is family run, right?
It's family run, but we've been blessed now to add people to our team. So we have somebody who helps us out in marketing, somebody who helps with operations, and we even have some guys that help us out on the actual farm part of it now too, so that we can focus on bringing more amazing regenerative food to more people. And that's been a huge mission of ours, and just trying to think about this as a business and as something that can support families with a really fair living wage, and we can bring these people into the fold of trying to change the world, has been really cool for us. So we don't do it all within the family. We have a lot of people that help us out now. And then a lot of our content comes from customers too. People that give us great feedback and they say, hey, I love this. And they post a picture up of something that they cooked, and we can go and share that and show our team and get everybody excited. I mean, that's really, really important too.
How have you expanded since you started the farm? You started with those 50 chicks, and now what?
So with 50 chicks, we thought that we were just going to consume those within the family. And I thought, oh, well, it's like 2 chickens a week, for half of the year or something. We'll do another batch. And me being the sort of always optimist entrepreneur type, I put a few things up on Facebook and said, hey, if anybody would be interested in buying some of these birds, we'll have a few of them for sale. And I put this little link up so people could put a deposit down for them. And all 50 birds sold out within the first 2 weeks. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. My family was all mad because they didn't have any chicken now. And it was just very, very surprising. So the next time after we harvested, we did 100 birds, and the same thing happened. We had this waiting list, and then 200, and then 500, and then 1,000. And things just completely grew from there. And people started asking us too. They're like, hey, we love your chicken. It's the best chicken we've ever had. Where should I get grass-fed beef? Where should I buy my lamb from? Where should I buy pork from? And so as a family, we started doing all this research on where the best sources were for stuff like that. We finally stumbled across this guy that did an amazing job doing pasture-raised beef, but he's an older gentleman, and he didn't really want to interact with customers too much. He just wanted to be on the farm and do his thing. And so we worked a deal with him where we said, hey, could we buy cows, bring them to the slaughterhouse and have them harvested, and then sell that beef under our label, but still telling your story and everything? He said, yeah, that'd be really helpful. Actually, I don't have great markets for my stuff. And so that sort of began our partner farming arrangements. And now we have 2 or 3 arrangements like that with different local farmers where we can really help them and let them focus on what they're good at and bring really great products to our customers too.
Well, it sounds fantastic. It's really neat to see that you've had success because you're so sound in your philosophy. I love it. I want to circle back to your health as we start to wrap up. How are you feeling these days, Paul?
Well, a little tired because I've got 2 little ones and another little one on the way, and a busy company to run. But my family has stayed very close to the Weston A. Price sort of eating philosophy, and it's been unbelievable for our family. Like I said, my father-in-law lost over 100 pounds. He looks younger than he did 5 years ago. Throughout our whole family, all the good things that come from good nutrition, which is fertility and vitality and all this feeling good and sleeping well and having healthy, vibrant, active kids. These are the rewards that we get from years and years of putting good food into our bodies.
Well, your operation just sounds wonderful. I love how it's grown from the 50 chicks to all that we see today.
It's been a blast, and it's been definitely an adventure, and it's been an honor to bring good food to people, and if people are interested in ordering, we'd love to bring on new clients and help you bring good food in your kitchen. But what I always like to close with too is this isn't about us. It's not about Primal Pastures or Pasture Bird. This is about a movement of bringing high quality, nutrient dense food back to the kitchen. And I think that there's thousands and thousands of great farms, small scale farms across the country that you should look at and try to support somebody in your area.
Wonderful. So now I'm going to ask you the question that I often ask my guests at the end. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, Paul, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, it'll sound cliche because we're on Wise Traditions, but I would say go and study the work of Dr. Weston A. Price and try to adopt something that looks like that model of eating, even just for 30 days. If it does nothing for you, then scrap it and throw it away. But if you're like millions and millions of other people that really has kind of a profound impact on the way that you feel and perform and sleep, then try to stick with it and see if it's a good fit for you. And I think making that small change for 30 days is really what inspired me and my whole family to go down this journey. And you never know what's going to come of it, but just removing the fog and the cloud and just being able to think clearly and move well, is definitely the way that you want to live.
Well, I know that I do. I know a lot of our listeners do. And those who don't yet just may because of your challenge. So thank you so much, Paul. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
My guest today was Paul Grieve. For more on Paul and his farm, go to primalpastures.com. And for the full show notes with highlights from this episode and links to resources we mentioned, just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and find the show notes for episode 127. If you are enjoying these shows, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a thing. And also remember that you can follow the Weston A. Price Foundation on Twitter and Instagram at Weston A. Price. And you can find me at Holistic Hilda on Twitter, at Holistic_Hilda on Instagram. I look forward to connecting with you. Next week, everybody, we get to hear from Stephen Lin, the author of The Dental Diet. Like Dr. Weston A. Price, Stephen gets how intricately linked our overall health is to our dental health. It's an excellent conversation with some dietary tips to help us avoid cavities and shore up our dental health naturally. Stephen even does some myth busting about braces, gum bleeding, and more. So you'll want to stay tuned for that episode. Finally, a quick thank you to my friends at Podcast Village, Rob Ford, Oscar, Charlie, the whole gang here. They help the show sound good. And my team of interns, Cynthia Castro-Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Amy Marvin, Lily Hempt, Mary Hine, and Olga de Villiers. That's it, you guys. So just stay tuned, keep listening, and know that we love you lots. We're yours in good health. See ya.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.